It was a cold night on the edge of Earth's outer colony. The sky was dark and silent until a bright flame shot across it. A small slave ship was crashing, its engines failing, its body burning in the atmosphere. People in the town looked up, but only one man got in his truck and drove toward the crash site. His name was John, a quiet man living alone on his farm, a war veteran, tired of the world and its cruelty. He had no family, no visitors, and no reason to care about the outside world, but something about the fire and the sky pulled him out of his house when he reached the crash site. Soldiers had already secured the area. The ship was smoking, and strange figures were being dragged out. Aliens, survivors, chained, bruised, and covered in dirty cloaks. Among them was a woman holding a small child tight in her arms. The child was crying softly. The woman had silver skin and long black hair that shimmered like metal under the firelight. But her eyes were full of fear. John stood at a distance. He wasn't supposed to get involved. But when the woman looked around in panic, their eyes met. For a moment, everything around them stopped. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She held her child tighter. The next day, the colony's leaders announced an emergency auction. The alien survivors would be sold cheap labor for those who needed it. Better than letting them starve, they said. They'll be fed and housed. But John knew what it really meant. Slavery, nothing more. He didn't plan to go. That had no use for a slave, but something inside him kept thinking of that woman's eyes. So he went. The auction was held in an old warehouse, bright lights, loud voices, people shouting prices. The aliens were lined up, chained and silent. Some looked down, others stared into space, like their minds had left their bodies. Then came the woman and her child. They were pushed onto the platform. The crowd grew louder. Someone laughed and said, "Buy one, get one free." The child clung to her mother's leg. Her eyes were big and scared. Her small fingers shook as she held on. The auctioneer began shouting, "Alien, female, strong, good for housework. Has a child 2 for 1. Start the bid at 500 credits. John stayed at the back. He told himself he wouldn't bid. But then he saw a fat merchant raise his hand, the same merchant who was known for beating his slaves. The child looked at him and began to cry. "No," she whispered in a small voice, "not him." John's hand rose before he even knew why. 600 credits, the auctioneer said. The merchant looked back, trying to see who outbid him. He raised his price. 700. John raised again. 8. The crowd turned to see who was bidding so high for a useless widow and a child. The auctioneer smiled. Going once, going twice. Sold. John stood there, silent, confused. By his own actions, what had he done? The woman and her child were unchained and brought to him. She didn't speak. Her hands shook as she held her daughter close. The girl looked up at him, her eyes still wet with tears. "You're free now," John said quietly. But they didn't understand. The woman just bowed her head and followed him to the truck. On the way back, they said nothing. The truck bounced on the dirt road, and the child finally fell asleep in her mother's arms. John kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror. The woman looked tired. Her clothes were torn. Her body had bruises, but she held herself with quiet strength. Back at the farm, he opened the front door. "You can sleep inside," he said. She shook her head and pointed to the barn. John frowned. "It's cold. The house is warmer." But she still walked toward the barn. He followed and laid out blankets. She sat down with her child beside the hay. She didn't ask for food or water. She just hugged her daughter and closed her eyes. John stood there for a while. Then he left and returned with warm soup and bread. He placed it near her. She looked at it but didn't touch it. "It's safe," he said. She tore the bread in half, gave one piece to her daughter, and only then took a bite herself. That night, John couldn't sleep. Who was she? Why did she refuse warmth and kindness? Why did her child cry out like that? And most of all, why had he raised his hand? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing. This was not a purchase. This was a beginning. The next morning, the barn was quiet. Not even the birds sang. John stepped outside with a mug of black coffee and walked toward the barn, unsure what he'd find. As he opened the door slowly, his eyes met hers again. The alien woman sat in the straw, her daughter asleep, in her lap. She had not moved from where he left her last night. The food bowl was empty, but she looked no less guarded. Her silver skin was dull from dust, her arms wrapped tightly around the child as if she thought someone would take her away at any second. John leaned against the doorframe and spoke calmly. "You don't have to stay out here," he said, his voice low, steady. "The house has heat. You're not prisoners." The woman did not reply. She only looked away. Her eyes were tired. John walked back to the house. He placed fresh clothes, a towel, and soap on the table. He wasn't sure if she would even understand what to do with them. But he had nothing else to offer. He wasn't rich or kind with words, just an old man with a quiet life. Hours passed. He didn't check the barn again. But when he heard the water running in the outdoor bath unit, he stood by the window. Through the steam and frost, he saw her. The woman stood with her back turned, carefully washing her daughter's hair with cold hands. The girl laughed once, splashing, and the sound made John pause. It had been years since laughter had echoed in this house. Later they came to the porch. The child wore one of John's old shirts, hanging down to her knees. The woman carried their dirty rags in a bundle. She tried to speak, pointing at the clothes like she wanted to return them. John raised a hand. "Keep them, please." She looked surprised but nodded slowly. Then, she and the child sat on the porch floor, not on the chairs. Even when he opened the door and motioned for them to come in, they stayed out. So he brought out 2 plates of stew and placed them down gently. The girl grabbed her spoon eagerly, but the woman stopped her. She tasted it first, like she was checking for poison. Only after that did she let the child eat. That's when John realized something. They were used to being treated like animals. The next evening a trader stopped by. He was from the auction. A loud man with sharp teeth and shiny boots. "I heard you want a pair." The man grinned. "Good price, huh? They don't talk much, but they're tough. You'll get work out of them." John didn't answer. "You planning to sell them again?" the trader asked, leaning close. "There's a buyer in the black zone. Pays double for good skin." John's jaw tightened. "They're not for sale." The trader laughed. "Come on, John, don't get soft. You're too old to play daddy to aliens." John stepped forward. "You can leave now." The man smirked but turned and walked away. That night, John sat on the front steps while the stars blinked above. The child was sleeping again in the barn, but the woman sat just outside, watching the sky like it was the only thing that hadn't hurt her. He walked over and placed an old blanket around her shoulders. She flinched at first but then relaxed. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "You don't belong in a cage." Still, no answer. He pointed to his chest. "John." She looked at him carefully, then touched her own Valari. Then she pointed toward the barn. Eula," John repeated. "That's your daughter." Valari nodded once. For a long moment they sat in silence, breathing the cold air together. Then John spoke again. "You can stay here. No one will touch you." Valari turned her head slightly. She didn't say thank you. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. The next morning, Eula was waiting at the door before sunrise, holding a flower from the field. She handed it to John and smiled wide, her sharp little teeth showing. He laughed. For the first time in years, he laughed without thinking. Maybe he had not saved them. Maybe they had saved him. A scream pierced the night. John jumped up from his bed, heart pounding. For a moment he thought it was a nightmare, but then he heard it again, sharp, high, terrified. It was Eula. He grabbed his coat, rushed down the stairs and ran outside, toward the barn. The door was wide open. Inside, Valari had thrown herself over her daughter, arms wrapped around the trembling girl. Eula was crying, her small hands covering her ears. The mother's eyes were wild with fear. John didn't know what to do. He stepped closer, but Valari snapped her head toward him and growled an animal sound. She thought he was the danger. She was ready to fight him. John raised both hands slowly and spoke gently. "It's okay. I heard her scream. I just want to help." Valari didn't move. Eula peeked through her fingers. She saw John. Her sobs slowed. She reached toward him. That small movement broke Valari's tension. She turned and looked at her daughter, then at John again. Her shoulders relaxed, just a little. John walked over and knelt beside them. "Bad dream?" Valari didn't respond. Eula nodded slowly. John looked at the woman and pointed at the house. "Come inside. She needs comfort, not cold." "Hey." Valari hesitated, but this time she didn't refuse. Inside the house, John wrapped Eula in a warm blanket and gave her some milk. She sat on the couch quietly, her head resting against his arm. Valari stood by the wall, tense, unsure if she should intervene. He noticed the way she watched every move he made, like a mother wolf trying to read a stranger's intentions. John got up and picked something off the old shelf, a dusty translator device he hadn't used since the war. He wiped it off, turned it on, and walked over to her. "Do you understand me better with this?" he asked. "VLAR." I flinched at the voice coming through the device, but then slowly nodded. "I'm not your enemy," John said. "You and Eula are safe here." She stared at him, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light. Then she whispered through the translator, "Safe is never real." The words hit hard. He sat down slowly. "Maybe not before, but I won't hurt you. Neither will anyone else, I promise." She blinked. Her eyes softened slightly. The translator made conversation easier now, but the silence between them still felt heavy. Not because they had nothing to say, but because there was too much that didn't need to be spoken. Over the next few days, Valari began to move more freely around the house. She never sat, never rested, but she cleaned the dishes after John cooked, folded laundry, and watched Eula play in the dirt outside. John noticed something. Every time Valari saw Eula laugh, her shoulders relaxed a little more. One evening, John returned from the market carrying extra supplies, clothes, medicine, and small boots. When he placed them on the table, Valari stared at the items, then looked at him. "I cannot pay," she said. He shook his head. "It's not for sale. It's not for sale. It's yours, all of it." "Why?" John smiled. "Because you're not a slave. You're a guest. A mother, a person." She looked down, silent. The next morning, Valari approached John as he repaired the fence. She stood quietly for a moment, then asked through the translator, "Why did you buy us?" John paused, his hand tightened on the wire. "I didn't buy you," he said. "I stopped someone worse from owning you. But still, you took us." He nodded. "Yes, and I didn't know why that day, but I think I do now." Valari looked at him waiting. "You looked at me," John said. "At the auction, you looked at me like I was your last hope, and I couldn't turn away from that." Valari sat down on a log nearby. "My people, we believe silence has meaning. Words can lie, but silence speaks truth." John chuckled softly. "Then maybe that's why we understand each other. I've always been better at silence." That night, something changed. Ula didn't cry. She fell asleep in a real bed, her arms around a stuffed animal John had found in the attic. Valari stayed up sitting near the fireplace. John handed her a cup of tea. She took it with both hands, then said quietly, "Thank you for letting us stay." "No need," John replied. But inside, something warm grew, not duty, not pity, something else, something like family. *A. Red light blinked on the weather tower. John saw it as soon as he stepped outside. The blinking meant only one thing: acid storm. Incoming. He dropped the toolbox in his hand and rushed back inside. "Valari," he called, already heading for the barn. She was outside brushing Eula's hair under the morning sun. The little girl giggled, but Valeri's face grew alert when she saw his expression. "Storm's coming," John said quickly. "A big one. Acid rain. Very dangerous." Valari stood up, her eyes scanning the sky. It looked clear now, but the winds were already shifting. The air smelled like burnt metal. "You can't stay in the barn," John added. "You and Eula have to come inside." Right now. Valari hesitated. She looked at the barn like it was her shield. But then a loud warning siren echoed from the colony tower in the distance. Even Eula stopped smiling without another word. Valari grabbed her daughter and followed John toward the house. Inside, John sealed the windows, locked the doors, and set the air filters. His old war shelter system still worked, thankfully. Thick clouds began rolling across the sky. The light turned greenish-yellow, casting a strange glow over everything. The wind howled. The first drop hit the metal roof and hissed like a snake. The storm had begun. Valari stood near the fireplace, holding Eula tightly. The child looked scared. Again, the walls shook slightly from the force of the wind. Rain pounded on the roof like claws. John sat across from them, rubbing his hands slowly. "It'll pass, maybe a few hours." Valari didn't answer, but she didn't look afraid for herself, only for her daughter. A sudden crash outside made Eula scream. John got up and peeked through the small side window. A large branch had snapped and hit the fence. Nothing serious, but enough to remind him how dangerous this storm really was. He turned back and saw Valari staring at the window too. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light, not from fear but from something inside her. Her people had strange biology, and John had never fully understood it. But in this light, she looked almost otherworldly. To distract Eula, he picked up an old wooden puzzle from the shelf and sat on the floor. "Want to try this?" he asked. Eula peeked from Valari's arms and crawled toward him slowly. She took the puzzle, confused at first, but then began fitting the pieces together. Her small fingers worked carefully. John helped her, smiling gently. Velar. I watched silently. "I used to do this with my niece," John said softly. "She's grown now, moved to one of the space cities." Eula placed the last piece. The puzzle showed a picture of a barn and a horse. "Good job, John," said Eula, grinned. Valari smiled faintly too, but it vanished as another loud boom shook the walls. She stood up suddenly. "Something is wrong," she whispered. John frowned. "What is it?" Valari moved to the back window and looked toward the barn. Her hands pressed against the glass. "Our blankets, our food still out there." John stood beside her. "We'll get you new ones," but Valari shook her head. "We do not waste." John sighed. "It's too dangerous right now." She looked at him, then turned away, clearly ashamed. A long silence followed. Finally, John stood. "I'll go. Just stay with Eula." Valera's eyes widened. "No, you'll get burned." "I've got gear," he said. "Old army suit in the shed. I'll be quick." Within minutes, he was suited up and stepping outside. The wind pushed against him, and the acid rain burned small holes in the suit's outer layer, but it held. He reached the barn, grabbed the items Valari left behind: blankets, a few small things, a strange pendant, and hurried back. When he returned, soaked and tired, Valari rushed toward him. "Are you hurt?" she asked, voice full of concern. John shook his head. "Just wet and old." Valari took the wet blanket and folded it carefully. Then she held out the pendant he had saved. "This was my husband's," she whispered. "You didn't have to get it, but you did." John looked at her gently. "He was important to you." She nodded slowly. "He died trying to protect us. You remind me of him." He didn't know what to say to that. But Eula ran up and hugged his leg tightly in that moment. The sound of the storm outside seemed distant. They sat together by the fire, wrapped in blankets. Three strangers brought together by fate, but in the middle of the worst storm, they had found something strong, something warmer than safety, something like trust. The knock came at dawn, 3 loud, heavy thuds on the front door. John froze mid-step as he carried firewood into the kitchen. Valari, who had just begun to warm milk for Eula, turned pale. The girl, still sleepy, clutched her mother's robe, without understanding why the air had suddenly gone so cold. John set the wood down gently and moved to the window. Outside stood 2 uniformed men and 1 woman. All 3 wore the dark green coats of the colony compliance unit. John's grip on the curtain tightened. They had come for Valari and Eula. He opened the door but didn't step aside. "Can I help you?" The woman at the front smiled coldly. "You've got 2 unregistered non-human dependents. We're here to collect them for relocation." John's voice stayed calm. "They're not slaves. They're free." "That doesn't matter," she replied. "Aliens without legal documentation can't stay on private property. This is standard procedure." John crossed his arms. "Since when do we take children away from safe homes?" One of the men behind her spoke up. "You broke the auction contract. You were supposed to report them for resale, not raise them like pets." John's jaw clenched. Behind him, Eula peeked around the corner. She saw the uniforms and froze. Valari gently pulled her back, whispering softly in her native tongue. But it was too late. One of the officers had spotted them. "There," he said. "Let's go." He stepped forward, but John blocked the door. "You're not taking them?" The officer raised an eyebrow. "You're going to stop us, old man?" John didn't answer. Instead, he stepped inside for a moment and returned with a small metal card. It was dusty, scratched, but still active. The officer's face changed the moment he saw it. "Veteran status," John said. "Full wartime exemption. I fought for this colony's soil. It gives me the right to shelter who I want, especially survivors." The woman at the front took the card and scanned it. Her scanner beeped and showed green. She frowned. "You can't keep them forever," she warned. "If they're found outside your land, they'll be taken. You know that." John took the card back. "Then they'll stay right here." The officers left without another word, but the silence they left behind was heavy inside. Valari held Eula close. Her hand shook. John sat down across from them and spoke slowly. "They won't come back soon, but we have to be careful there." Watching, Valari nodded, her voice low. "I thought it was over. I thought we were safe." John sighed. "So did I." That night, Eula cried again, not from dreams, but from fear. She didn't want to sleep. She kept looking at the windows, asking if the bad humans would come back. John sat beside her and held her hand. "No one will take you," he promised. "Not while I'm here." Valari stood at the door, watching. Later, after Eula had fallen asleep, she approached him in the quiet hallway. "I have something to show you," she said. She reached into her robe and pulled out a thin metal pendant. Inside was a small glowing chip. "This is our record," she explained. "Proof of our people's destruction. My husband died protecting this. It's not just our past. It's why they want to erase us." John took the pendant and examined it under the light. The chip inside was unlike anything he'd seen. It held data, memories, and something else, something living, a sound, like a heartbeat. "They fear the truth," Valari whispered. "But if you carry this, if I fall, you can tell our story." John handed it back. "No one's falling," he said. "Not on my land." The next morning, Valari began helping more around the house, not out of fear, but choice. She cooked, cleaned, and even repaired old solar panels on the roof. Eula followed John like a shadow, asking questions in her broken English, laughing again when he tripped over the cat. But the mood had changed. A shadow hung over them, they knew. Now safety could vanish in a single knock. That evening, John sat alone on the porch. Valari joined him, bringing warm tea. "You didn't have to fight for us," she said softly. He looked at her. "I didn't fight. I protected my home." She smiled for the first time, truly smiled. And in that moment, John realized something deep in his heart. They weren't guests anymore. They were family. Asterisk. John had just returned from the fields when it happened. As he stepped onto the porch, tired and dusty, a small weight slammed into his leg. It was Eula. She wrapped her arms around him and smiled up with shining eyes. "Papa." John froze. His breath caught in his chest. Valari, who had been sweeping near the doorway, dropped the broom. Her eyes went wide. Eula looked between them, confused. "Is it wrong?" Valari rushed over and pulled her daughter back gently. "No, my star," she whispered in their native tongue. "It's just ... unexpected." Eula clung to her mother's side, now silent. Her small hands trembled. John knelt down slowly, his voice soft. "You can call me that, Eula, if it makes you happy." The little girl smiled again, and Valari exhaled slowly. But her eyes held something else, a storm of emotion she couldn't hide. That night, the air was thick with quiet. After dinner, John stood outside near the fence, watching the stars blink in and out above the trees. The wind was gentle. It should have been peaceful, but something inside him felt like it was shifting. Vala joined him. She stood silently for a while, then spoke. "She's never called anyone that," she said. John looked at her. "Not even her real father." Valari shook her head. "He died before she could speak. He gave his life so we could escape. We were hiding in a cargo crate on a smuggler's ship. He blocked the door when soldiers found us, and bought us just a few seconds more." Her voice cracked. but she kept going. He told me something before they shot him. Something I never forgot. John waited, giving her time. Valari stared at the stars. He said, "Don't let her grow up in fear. Give her a reason to laugh." She turned her head toward John. "She laughs now. Because of you." John looked down at his hands, rough and scarred. "I never thought I'd have a family again." Valari stepped closer, her voice quiet. "Neither did I." Days passed, and things changed. Eula followed John everywhere, into the barn, through the fields, even during supply runs. She asked questions about everything. Why the grass was green. Why cows mooed. Why humans had so many socks. John tried to answer them all, though sometimes he just laughed and made something up. Valari, meanwhile, began learning the human language faster. She practiced at night, reading old books by lantern light. She even fixed John's old communicator and sent messages to other refugee networks, checking if any of her people had survived. Each time the answer came back the same. None had. One evening, John walked into the living room and found Valari painting symbols on the wall with blue chalk. "What's that?" he asked. She smiled. "Our blessing mark. It means chosen home." John looked at it carefully. "I like it," he said. She wiped her hands and turned to him. "You've given us safety. Now I give you our bond. This market means we're part of each other's lives." John paused. "You really mean that?" Valari nodded. "I was taught that family is not blood. It is choice. You chose us when no one else would." Later that night, as Eula slept peacefully in her new bed, John placed an old photo on the shelf above the fireplace. It was a picture of him and his brother from the war. Next to it he placed a new one, Valari and Eula standing in the field, smiling in the sun. 2 photos, 2 lives, but the same house, the same heart. The next morning, a delivery drone arrived. John retrieved the box and opened it at the table. Inside were 3 citizenship application forms. 1 for him, 1 for Velari, 1 for Yula. He looked up and saw Valari reading the names, her eyes filled with tears. "You're giving us more than shelter," she whispered. "You're giving us a place in this world." John nodded. "Families don't need papers. But sometimes, papers help." Valari stepped forward and placed her hand over his. "Thank you, John, for everything." He didn't reply with words. He didn't need to, because, in that silence, trust lived, and love grew. The message came at sunrise. A red warning alert blinked on John's old communicator. He hadn't seen that symbol in years. It meant final inspection. The colony was sending officers again. This time it wasn't a visit. It was an order. "We're coming to remove Valari and Eula by force." John's hands shook as he read the details. They'd found out about the citizenship application. They'd denied it. No reason given. No chance to appeal. He stepped outside, the cold morning air biting his skin. The sun had barely risen, but Valari was already in the garden, watering the new plants. Eula chased a chicken across the yard, laughing with joy. How could they take that away? He walked toward Valari. "We don't have much time." She turned to him, eyes narrowing. "What happened?" "They're coming today with soldiers." She didn't speak, but her hands tightened around the watering can. "Pack what you can," he said. "I have a plan." By midday, a small ship stood hidden behind the hills, an old freighter John had rebuilt in secret years ago. He'd once used it for supply runs across dangerous zones. Now it would be the only way to keep them safe. Valari didn't ask questions. She trusted him now. Inside the house, Eula sat quietly as Valari packed clothes, photos, and the pendant with her husband's memory. John filled boxes with food and fuel. Every step felt heavy. This wasn't just leaving, this was tearing roots out of the ground. But sometimes you must leave a house to protect the home you built inside your heart. Then, the rumble of engines. A black transport craft landed near the road. Dust filled the air. Colony soldiers stepped out in armor, weapons ready. John stood on the porch, waiting. An officer approached, tall, cold-eyed, reading from a datapad. "You are harboring 2 undocumented Xeno refugees," he said. "By law, they must be handed over immediately." John didn't move. "You know they've hurt no one. You know they're safer here than anywhere else." "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." The officer stepped forward. "Don't make this difficult, citizen." John looked past him. Valari and Eula stood at the back of the house, ready to run. The ship was waiting. He had to buy them time. "I won't let you take them," John said. The officer raised his hand. "We're authorized to use force." John took a step down. "Then you'll have to get through me." Before the officer could respond, a loud bang echoed from behind the barn. It was a distraction. John smiled. Valari had triggered the noisemaker he installed years ago for wild animals. The soldiers turned toward the sound. That was the signal. Valari ran with Eula through the back trail, hidden by trees and high grass. John knew they only had minutes. The officer barked, "Secure the area." John blocked the path again, looking for someone. The officers shoved him aside, but John fought back, buying every second. The soldiers searched the house, but it was empty now. Too late. Valari reached the ship, breath ragged, heart racing. She opened the hatch and lifted Eula inside. John appeared, minutes later, bruised, limping but alive. He sealed the hatch. They didn't follow. Valari shook her head. Not yet. John took the pilot's seat. The ship rumbled, lifting off the ground below them. The house grew smaller and smaller. Smoke rose from the fire the soldiers had set in anger. But John didn't look back because the real home wasn't the wood or the walls. It was right beside him. Eula sat between them, holding both their hands. "Where are we going?" she asked. John looked at Valari. She smiled softly. "Somewhere. No one will chain us again," he said. Later that night, stars filled the sky beyond the ship's window. John set the course for a free system. Far from any colony laws, Valari rested her head on his shoulder. Eula slept peacefully in a bed built just for her, and in the quiet hum of the ship, in the stillness of the stars, something unspoken passed. Between them, they had lost everything, and yet they had gained something stronger than fear, a new beginning. A family born not of blood, but of choice.